Welcome to EJB Talks, Rutgers Blaustein School experts in policy, planning, and health, where we talk with our faculty and staff experts, as well as students, about how the fields of public policy, urban planning, public health, health administration, and public and urban informatics affect your lives. Welcome to EJB Talks. I'm Stuart Shapiro, the Dean of the Blaustein School, and the purpose of this podcast is to highlight the work my colleagues and our alumni are doing in the fields of policy, planning, and health. This is our last episode of the 10th season of EJB Talks and has become a bit of a tradition here. We're going to conclude with me mostly talking about politics and where we stand as we head into what is likely to be a momentous, contentious, and controversial presidential election. We waited a bit to tape this episode because we knew that the trial of Donald J. Trump in New York City was nearing its conclusion and wanted to wait until it was over. And last week it ended with 34 guilty verdicts. And so back to feed me questions and make sure I don't go off the rails in talking about this is our former producer, Amy Cobb. Welcome back, Amy.
Hey, well, I feel like there is no other way but to go off the rails.
We went off the rails a long time ago.
Yeah, we did. We've been way off the rails for a long time. Okay, I'm just gonna dive right in. I hate the use of the word unprecedented. I think this is precedented at this case. It's always something new with this former presidential candidate. Okay, so Donald Trump was found guilty. Can you briefly just tell us of what in this particular case?
Sure. Well, it is unprecedented. A president has never been found guilty of felony charges before, and a nominee of one of the two major parties has never been running as a convicted felon before. Donald Trump, in the first of the four criminal trials that he faces, was found guilty last week in New York State Court on 34 counts of falsifying business records. And before we go down falsifying business records, that's kind of boring and trivial. These are records that he falsified in order to cover up the fact that his attorney, Michael Cohen, was paying Stormy Daniels, the adult film actress, to stay silent about her affair with Donald Trump. And the fraud he committed was reimbursing Michael Cohen and not reporting that as a campaign expense. So essentially, not only was it financial fraud, but it was election fraud.
So I have a quick question. I had heard that if he had paid her himself, it would have been a moral issue for some, not for many, but it would not have been a legal issue. Is that correct?
That is probably right. I don't know election law well enough to say for sure, but the last time Donald Trump paid his own bills was a long, long time ago. And so it's not really a terribly realistic what if, right? So it is, but he didn't. And so, it counts as election fraud, counts as financial fraud, and 12 jurors agreed with that.
Okay, so did this verdict actually surprise you? I had heard that this was also seen as the weakest case that is currently brought against Trump, and the quickness of the verdict.
Yeah, now I wouldn't, surprised is probably strong. I do think it was the weakest case. The legal theory connecting the fraud to the underlying crime of election finance violations has never been tried before and was seen as somewhat tenuous. We should never forget, however, that in the U.S. justice system, the prosecution always has an advantage, and particularly once you get to trial. And so the fact that it was a rich white guy as the defendant makes it seem like, oh, I'm surprised he was convicted. But the reality is, most people that go to trial, most people that face charges, end up either pleading guilty or being found guilty. That's just the way the criminal justice system works, and that's a problem for a separate podcast. Um, but um, but yeah, and the speed of which it wasn't too surprising either. I was telling my family that, look, if this goes into next week, and this was last Wednesday or Thursday when the verdict was handed down, then they're probably trying to convince one or two holdout jurors, and it's not going well. If we're going to get a guilty verdict, I expected it on Thursday or Friday, and indeed we got it late Thursday afternoon. Um, that said, the three cases that are, well, two of the three cases that are remaining, I think, if and when they ever get to trial, are much more, even more likely to result in guilty convictions for Donald Trump. The Georgia case is complicated. That almost falls in a separate category.
Okay. So that being said, what a surprise that verdicts got his base fired up. And that's not really that remarkable, considering they seem to be fired up about a lot. But I hate the term swing voters. I don't necessarily think there's a lot of them, but maybe I'm wrong. But what's the potential impact on those swing voters? Not only just the verdict, but how it's being played out currently in politics and press.
So we don't know. Is the short answer. Let's put
That's
aside.
not helpful.
Well, I'm going to give you more, but I wanted to at least say that up front. Um, the Let's put aside one idea, however, the idea that this helps Trump. That is flat out ridiculous. There is no way being found guilty of 34 crimes is going to get people to say, "Ooh, that's the guy I want." And so you're not going to see a boost for Trump, and indeed the early polls are not showing that. The question instead, and it's going to take months to answer this, is does it hurt him, and if so, how much? And the answer we get this week is not necessarily the answer we have 5 months from now on election day. And let me that could cut either way, and let me explain what I mean by that. Um, right now the verdict is in the news, right? And so, in some sense, you might say that this is the worst it's going to get for Trump. We're going to see a bounce against him, and then those people that were previously undecided will move back to being undecided, or will move over to Trump like they would have anyway. On the other hand, both campaigns will have something to say about this, how this verdict is portrayed by both campaigns, and the degree to which the Biden campaign can successfully keep it in the news and keep it in the front of people's minds will hurt Trump, and the extent to which the Trump campaign can say, in the words of the former president, this was a rigged trial and therefore not legitimate, and convince people of that will move people back to where they
That's
were.
his favorite thing,
Oh,
rigged.
he loves the word rigged. Well, only when he loses.
Yeah, that's
But
true. That's very
um,
true.
but I do want to sort of to talk about your swing voter piece for a second here. First of all, this election is supremely close. So if there are 5 swing voters out there, it matters how we affect them, and there are a lot more than that. Right now, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is polling at 9%, I believe,
That's
in the
terrifying.
polls. And right now, there are a lot of people. Uh, there are people that are undecided. That's another 5 or 6% in the polls. So that's 14, 15% of the electorate who could be affected by this news, and therefore would characterize them as swing voters. And both Biden and Trump have some weak support. Some people who are holding their noses and voting for them. This will not affect, I don't think, the people holding their noses and voting for Biden, but it could affect the people holding their noses who right now say they are going to vote for Trump. So we're talking close to 20% of the electorate that could be affected in one way or the other by this decision. It's not to say they all of them will. It's not even to say a majority of them will. But if even a small number of them will in a close election like this, that could make the difference between who wins in November.
This feels eerily reminiscent of the first Trump campaign. And I think some of us are still a little shell-shocked from that, although I think Biden faces some of the same challenges, especially from younger voters.
Yeah, it's every election is different. We always try to analogize to a previous election, and it's particularly tempting when you have the same two candidates as the last one. And so, the clearest precedent you should have is 2020, and of course, Biden won, and Biden won by 7 million votes. It was closer, obviously, in the Electoral College, but if you're going to pick an election to analogize to, that's your best bet. But every election is unique. This won't be 2020, but it won't be 2016 either. It will be an election that is determined by factors unique to 2024. That includes the fact that we've got the two oldest candidates ever to run for president in Biden and Trump. It includes the fact that the economy is basically good, but that people still have concerns about inflation. Legitimate concerns, frankly. And it will include the fact that one of the candidates, and I will repeat this as many times as I have to over the next 5 months, just got convicted of 34 felony counts. These are the factors that will determine the 2024 election, plus some things we don't know about yet.
I was just about to say, there's plenty of time.
There is still 5 months. Trump has to pick a vice president yet. I don't expect that will make a major difference in the campaign. We all know what the sort of general contours of his pick will look like. Somebody that is willing to rush to a microphone to defend whatever he does and says is pretty much the only criteria or the key criteria for him. And so there's that. There are the debates, which I don't think will happen, frankly.
Right.
And
I was curious about that too.
Yeah, I don't see that. There are the inevitable verbal gaffes and slip ups that will happen when you have a 77-year-old running against an 83-year-old, or 79 and 83. I don't even remember, some ridiculously high number. And both of them will say things that cause those swing voters to pause as they think about their electoral choices. So there's still a fair amount to happen, but I don't know that anything as big will happen as what happened last week. Probably the most important event of the 2024 campaign happened last week, and whether that's enough to make a difference, we'll see. There is the Supreme Court decision.
I was just about to ask about that. So do you think do you think they're going to make the decision? Because I've heard
they will. They have to make the decision.
Have to.
There's no.
And what do you think they're swaying towards?
So just as
a crystal ball.
Yeah, just to refresh everyone's memory, this is one of the other four criminal cases in which Trump has been indicted, and this is
That's just terrible. By the way, can we just put that aside?
Yeah, no, it's
four. That's bad.
And it should be more, frankly. But and this was the most serious of the cases. This is the case stemming out of initially the Liz Cheney committee hearings about Trump's role in the Capitol riot on January 6, 2021, and the degree to which he is criminally liable for the events of that riot. The Supreme Court is hearing two cases, actually, which impact Jack Smith's prosecution of Trump. Trump is being brought up on 4 charges with relation to the January 6th trial. The big case, the high-profile case, is that Trump claims that because he was president, he has absolute immunity from prosecution for any actions that he took in furtherance of his role as president, and that anything he did in January 6th was in furtherance of that role. Um, Before the case was heard, I found it highly unlikely that the Supreme Court would rule for Trump. I now find it less unlikely, but still probably borderline unlikely that they will rule for Trump.
I
Um,
realize people can't see my face, but I'm making very unhappy
yeah,
faces.
some of the questioning in the hearing was towards the end of looking to find a justification for giving Trump immunity. But whether or not you had five justices that bought into that, I think that is much less certain. I do expect that Alito and Thomas and probably Gorsuch will vote to give Trump mostly immunity. The question is, do Roberts, Kavanaugh, and Barrett bracket off some of the things that Smith is charging Trump with from prosecution? I don't think they'll bracket off everything. I think the Smith hearing will then progress after the Supreme Court reaches a decision, which will be in June or the first week of July. It'll be before July 4th, for
Oh
sure.
boy.
Um,
Oh boy. Oh, what a wonderful gift.
I should note, though, and this gets much less attention, there is a second case before the Supreme Court, not in which Trump is the defendant, but rather in which some of the January 6th
Oh,
rioters
that's
are
right.
the
That's right.
defendant. And whether or not you can use the Sarbanes-Oxley um, law, which was meant to curb corporate crime, but has a obstruction of Congress provision in it and has been used to jail quite a few of the rioters, whether or not that is a legitimate use of the Sarbanes-Oxley
Hmm.
law. And it could be that the justices rule that it is not. Most of the January 6 rioters will stay in jail because they're in jail on other charges as well. Smith's case against Trump will drop from 4 charges to 2
Okay.
if they bracket that off, and that I see as at least a 50-50 proposition. So expect to see that as well, and it may be a way that Roberts splits the baby, if you will, taking away 2 of the charges while not giving Trump immunity from the other 2. Would not surprise me if that's where we come out. But again, that's just crystal ball gazing.
So happy
Nothing.
248th birthday, America. Put that on your calendar.
Yeah, no, that's so. Yeah, that's where I think the Supreme Court cases stand. The other 2 cases, just as a footnote, the documents case, Judge Eileen Cannon has pretty much ensured that that will not be heard before the election, and the Georgia case is such a hot mess
Yeah.
that
That's a nice way to put it.
there is no way that is getting heard before the election. I would be surprised if it's heard in 2025. Let's face it, if Trump is president, none of this matters.
Right.
But if he loses, then these cases move along. The Georgia case, though, won't move along till late 25 or sometime in 26.
Okay. I'm going to ask this generalized question, but I don't even know if I want you to talk about it because this is just all giving me a stomach ache. I need some Tums. What what do you feel in all reality that the road looks like as we go towards November and beyond? And I think maybe part of it is, um, you've always been level-headed about these things. We certainly got through the Trump administration. We're already, I can't believe, through the first 4 years of Biden. What are these possible impacts?
Um, so what do I think the election looks like?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, we are a bitterly divided country and a very closely divided country. I'm sure I've said that in response to questions you've given me on previous episodes of the podcast. Elections are going to be close for the foreseeable future. And this one will be no exception. Um, I've been saying it was 50-50, for a long time now, since it was clear Trump would be the nominee again. And I think last week's news moves it to 52-48 or something along those lines for Biden. I think Biden is possibly a slight favorite right now. Um, but the election is going to be close. It is going to come down to probably the three Midwestern states, possibly a few others that could be in play as well. And it will not be settled on election night. I will tell you one thing. In 2020, I was telling people in the week or two before the election, don't be worried about the election results. Biden's going to win. Be worried about what happens afterward.
I do remember that because we even
And
talked about it on a
yep.
podcast. Yes.
And at the risk of tooting my own horn, boy, was I 100%
You
right.
were. It was really bad, actually.
What I will say this time is, continue to be worried about the election. It's close. It's very close. But if Biden wins, be very worried about what happens afterwards again. I would not surprise me to see a repeat. From Trump's perspective, the stakes are higher now for him than they were in 2020. In 2020, he wouldn't be president anymore. And he obviously didn't like that. It interfered in his narcissistic view of how he's always right and the world always does what he says. But in 2024, particularly with last week's verdicts, the case for Trump is, his 4 criminal prosecutions. If he is elected president, they go away. One way or another, they go away.
Yeah.
If he is not elected president, he will be found guilty. 34 will seem like a small number in terms of the number of things he's found guilty of. And at some level, even though I believe that whatever is afflicting the former president has taken a serious toll on his mental acuity, he understands that.
Yeah.
And he gets the stakes of this election. And while we all see the stakes as existential, so does he.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to remember that.
Well, so I should really just enjoy this summer.
Go on vacation and try not to read the news too much or follow social media.
I try my best. I actually really do because it's just noise at this point. Well, thanks for keeping it real, Stuart.
Hey, that's my job here. A big thank you. Well, thank you to Amy for coming back. Very always happy to have you on and to see you. And also a big thank you to our new producer, Tamara Swedberg, and to Karen Olson. We are done for the season now. We will be back in the fall with our 11th season of EJB Talks. And I'm sure there will be at least a couple episodes on the election in that, because let's face it, we will, despite Amy's efforts to avoid social media and the news, we're all going to be sucked into the vortex come September, October. All right. Have a great summer and stay safe.